and this is our launch of the Intersection series. I am a person who's experienced a lot of joy in my life, but this is maybe the happiest day of my life because I have hoped for something like this to happen here for a very long time. We have lots of ways that we bring the community into our space, and some of that involves music making or concerts, some spoken word events. We say that we stand at the intersection of faith, culture, and community, and this feels like the embodiment of that in its fullest sense, and so I'm so grateful. I want to just say that you're going to be hearing about all of our participants in a moment, but I want to acknowledge Allison Buckingham, who has been a friend to this parish for a very long time, and might have actually, though I don't know that I've told you this, Allison, you might have inspired this conversation today because of your great heart and concern about food justice for a very long time. And I dreamt about you being here, sitting here and doing exactly what you're about to do today. You welcomed in Natalie, and I'm so grateful for that. Reverend Brendan, who you're going to hear from shortly, invited Lori, and Zodi too. I think I might have said this in my email to you, but basically having a vegan donut shop in Brooklyn Heights was like the moment I died and went to heaven. So you are a vision to me and what you're doing, and the fact that you're here is such a blessing. I'm so grateful. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the fifth participant in the conversation, and that's Jen Chapin, who is also an old friend of this parish and who has performed here before. And Jen is going to open this event with a song. So I turn it over to you, Jen. Please welcome her and all our guests.
I'll try not to over-explain this song. It's a song about food justice, our food system, and we are humans. We have this primal need for stories. Not so much stories here as little snapshots of this food system and how fundamentally it depends on migrants. City shut down, the B-84 was the only good ride to the grocery store. Paycheck goes to the glucose strip. Patience goes to the 95-minute bus trip. 30-hour week, I wish they give me more, and I wonder what it's all for when I can't feed my baby no more. Worry, worry, work and cry. Full warm breast goes limp and dry. Wilted leaves still, price too high, too hard to feed my baby. Grandma grew her yams in the yard. In the Carib sun, child, it's not so hard. But she traded that sun for the cold and the cash. Strong hands picking up office trash. You never dig dirt with a new green card, but her fingers still ache for the yard now that feeding her baby so hard. Worry, worry, work and cry. Full warm breast goes limp and dry. Wilted leaves still, price too high, too hard to feed my baby. Junk food minefield on the TV. Dinner time battle, him against me. Change the channel, try not to see. Starvation, still starvation in the 21st century. Worry, worry, work and cry. Full warm breast goes limp and dry. Wilted leaves still, price too high. Red raw fingers fill the sack. Raid the trailer, you send them back. Silos rotting, still I lack enough to feed my baby. It's tough to feed my baby.
Hello, I am Reverend Brendan Nee. I'm the Associate Rector here at St. Anne and the Holy Trinity Church and Pro-Cathedral. Thank you so much for starting off this panel and this event with such powerful words. So thank you, Jen. I want to welcome you all again and also welcome anyone who's joining us online for this first event in what we're calling the Intersection Series. And as Canon John said, this is a series that has been a long time in the making, even longer than I have been here serving at St. Anne's. And I'm delighted to be part of the group, many, many people giving love and time and energy and thought to bringing this series to life. Now, what is the Intersection Series? Well, if you read the description that we put out, which I know is a really hit or miss, I have come to learn, then you'll know it's a little bit about bringing together people from diverse perspectives, experiences, insights, positions to confront some of the most pressing justice issues of our time. And as we were thinking about what we wanted to offer, not only to our St. Anne's community, but to the wider Brooklyn and New York and statewide and nationwide community who may be able to join us in this work, we realize that even a word as simple as justice has become so divisive and so politicized in our time. And rather than shy away from the implications of that, rather than pandering to the middle, we decided that we at St. Anne's wanted to take a stand on the right side of history, on the side of justice, and find some of the best and the brightest and the most brilliant and the most insightful people who we could to illuminate these complex issues for us from many different angles, to show all the facets that we might consider when we look at something like sustenance, like food justice, or like identity, as we'll be talking about on June 1st, or sanctuary, as we'll be talking about on October 5th. So thank you so much for being part of this inaugural event. Thank you for giving us all your time and your attention, which I know is in short supply. And we hope that you walk away today feeling not only like you are part of this broader movement working towards justice, working towards dignity for all people, but also that you have something change inside you so that you can then carry that out into your own lives, into your workplaces, into your communities, wherever it is that you think people might be receptive to, or even if they don't think they're receptive, that there might be a chance to plant that seed of change so that we can start creating together the justice, loving, and dignified world that we all want to see. And I will not say any more at this moment because we have so many wonderful things to hear, I'm sure, from this panel. But I will go ahead and introduce our participants now. You just heard from Jen Chapin, a musician and activist who is particularly active within food justice through Why Hunger. And then we have Zoditu Jewel, the president of the Brown Collective, a culinary food group that owns Cloudy Donut Co., which you may have had a chance to sample in the parish hall. And if you didn't, you definitely need to go after the event because they are excellent. Yeah, donuts deserve a round of applause always.
Thank you.
Professor Lori A. Flores, Associate Professor of History at SUNY Stony Brook. Dr. Natalie Greaves-Peters, a postdoctoral scholar at the Lori M. Tisch Center for Food, Education, and Policy at Teachers College, Columbia University. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Allison Buckingham, who is our moderator for this event, as well as a certified dietitian nutritionist and assistant professor of public health at Farley Dickinson's University School of Health Sciences. And Dr. Allison Buckingham will say a little bit more about what this event, Sustenance, is meant to accomplish. Can we please give them all a round of applause?
Thank you, Brendan. Before we get started with the questions that I have for the panelists, I just wanted to take a minute and talk a little bit more about sustenance. And when I think about sustenance, even though this panel is focused on food and food justice, it's more than just the food that we eat, right? It's our energy, it's support, it's the care that we need to keep us going, both in body and in spirit. And it's our universal need for nourishment that really underscores our interdependence. When we think about sustenance in a broader sense, I think we become more aware of the deeper connections between food and justice, and the importance of ensuring that everybody has the resources that they need and the dignity that they need to thrive. So thank you again for that introduction. I'm so honored to be the moderator today with these really exceptional panelists. So we'll start with Dr. Lori Flores. Can you talk a little bit about how the history of agricultural labor in this country, particularly amongst Latinx workers, informs our present-day food system?
There we go. Everybody can hear me. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. So I'll be basing most of my comments on my two books, but mostly the one that just came out a couple months ago, Awaiting Their Feast, about Latino, Latinx food workers in the Northeast. The agricultural system has definitely informed a lot about our present-day food systems and the inner workings, what we see as, consumers in the external realm, but also what's happening in the internal sort of hidden realm of food production and distribution that a lot of us don't see. The agribusiness interests that continue to lobby a lot of our representatives in government have definitely influenced the ways in which food and the way that it's made, the way that it's harvested, the way that it's transported to us, the way that it's served. A lot of those realms are invisible, and by design, that they're kind of kept out of our view. As we know, food labor, ever since the era of slavery, has been under conditions of confinement, and we have moved from enslavement and indentured labor to produce our food in this nation to other systems of confinement, but cloaked within the language of consent. So a lot of guest worker programs that we have in this country are cloaked within language of legality and contracts and voluntary migration and choice. exerted by people. But as these programs, are looked into in reality, and the lack of regulation that we have right now with H-2 visa programs, other agricultural labor programs that many of us are unaware of, you find a lot of confinement within the conditions of these workers. So as we have moved over centuries, our food system has definitely stayed predicated upon the vulnerability and precarity of people. The history, especially amongst Latino or Latinx food workers, it's obvious to us now in the modern day because we think of our food labor force as heavily of that demographic, and it is. But it is, even within that demographic, a lot more diverse than we think. So within who we would characterize as Latinx, you find a lot of Caribbean workers, both citizen and migrant, who are working in our food system. Indigenous labor from Latin America, of course, is working in our food system. Contrary to people thinking that all of this food labor is migrant, a significant portion is still citizens. And so they combined have stayed sort of this underclass, and that has a lack of a lot of visibility in our society.
Zoditu, can you talk a little bit about Cloudy Donuts? So as we've heard, and we're all very excited about, a vegan donut shop in this neighborhood, and your business model prioritizes reverse gentrification. Can you explain what that means in practice to you?
Absolutely. So I'm so happy you guys tried the donut, so hopefully you'll come see us. We are located on Columbia Place, right off of Girolamo Street, Friday through Sunday, by the way. So to give you some background context, right, before we came to New York, we actually have 2 locations in Baltimore, Maryland. That's where we started. Derek and I started Cloudy Donut in 2020, actually, so we've spoken to many of our peers who started their journeys during COVID. The unique experience that we had was that when we started Cloudy Donut Company, we actually acquired the building for which we opened our brand. And so during COVID, we were able to scale our brand because we were our landlords. Cloudy Donut Co. is it's like a carry-out, like a grab and go. We do have outdoor seating, but it lends itself to be you get your donuts and you go about your day. And so that really helped us progress within the community because a lot of businesses had to close at that time. And we were able to stay open because we followed the COVID rules of the 6 feet, and the masks and the things like that. So we have been, every year since 2020, from 2020 to 2024, Cloudy Donut has opened a new location. We opened in New York October 22nd, 2022. And when we opened in Brooklyn Heights, we're in the subset community of Willowtown. And what we learned was that we had become the first Black-owned food and beverage business in the community. And this was sort of perplexing to us, and we learned about this. Actually, an interesting anecdote is that one of our neighbors had come in. She's a resident of Brooklyn Heights, lived here, grew up here, lived here, and she asked myself and my partner if we were helping to move the business in. And unbeknownst to her, she found out that we were actually the proprietors of the business. And she was completely floored. She said, in my 50 years of living in Brooklyn Heights, I'd never seen a Black-owned business. Now, we did come to find that Bentley's is actually the first Black-owned business in Brooklyn Heights. But when it comes Bentley's, the shoe store. I don't want to say the wrong. Bentley's, okay. But when it comes to food and beverage, Cloudy Donut has become the first. And so my background being from Washington, D.C., I saw how gentrification truly impacted my city, right? And so we do what I call it's not the dictionary version, it's reverse gentrification, which is bringing our Black-owned businesses into affluent communities absent of color. and adding value. So we're not just coming in and saying, we're a Black business, you should support us, right? We opened actually officially October 22nd, 2022, but we opened privately to the Brooklyn Heights community first on October 20th. We were the first business in Willowtown to have a ribbon cutting ceremony. And when we opened, before we opened, I actually moved to Brooklyn Heights. So I lived right on Hicks Street from 2021 to 2023. And it was really important for me to live within the community for which we plan to lay our seeds and be a part of the community, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, I'm a new business, you should come support me, but it's another thing to say, I'm a part of your community, I'm adding to your community. And the beautiful thing about what we've been able to do by being within the community is also showing Black and brown people and people of all creeds that you can go anywhere, right? As I believe as people of color, we've experienced marginalization in this country. And so it's really important for us to say, we can open anywhere and we can be a part of the community, we can add value, we have something that you like, that you want. And how can we show up in spaces where we may not otherwise be? And since opening, in Brooklyn Heights, we've been able to scale our business. Now we're in Nolita. And so we've learned that we have become the first in many of the sense, and our goal is not to be the last. So it's, participating in conversations like these, to be in conversation with community like the St. Anne's Church, for people to understand, who we are and where we intend to go. Because as I said, while we may be the first, we won't be the last. And that's the work of the reverse gentrification.
Natalie, can you speak to nutrition education a little bit as we continue to talk about food? What are some of the effective ways to improve nutrition education and access at the community level?
Sure. I'm a registered dietitian and oops. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. So I am also a registered dietitian, and in my previous life, I taught in middle school. And I remember going into class, and for those of you who have experience with children as a parent or a teacher, middle schoolers are like the hardest to love. They're not cute and young. They're not high schoolers where they just tone you out. They're, yeah. So I remember going in and asking a kid, hey, it was the nutrition educator, that's how I started, fresh off of just becoming a registered dietitian, and I'm going into class, I'm like, do you know where apples come from? We live in New York State, right? And the kid said to me, from the supermarket, and I was like, okay, great, this is how today's gonna go. And then, I thought it was just being a middle schooler, and then I kept on pressing, and then I realized they were getting embarrassed because they really thought that's where the apple started, the journey of the apple. So this invisible curtain that Dr. Flores was just talking about, it was like very striking to me. And that was kind of what started my journey from not just nutrition education, but to food justice. It's imperative that you educate students about food, because we assume, especially for those of us who are older, and kind of know where an apple comes from, and maybe a part of that world where, the conglomerate agro-food industry did not take over our world and put blinders, we can't see where the back was happening behind that apple arriving there. Nutrition and education is imperative. And the obvious place to start is in schools, because children are required to be there from K through 12. But that's a struggle with, everything trying to get on that 9 to 3 curriculum. It's hard to get it. So oftentimes when I teach nutrition education or taught it, it was after school. But I also think of, there are people who may leave school and never ever have a single minute of nutrition education, and they still need to be educated, because we're asking you, sitting up here and asking you to do all of these things, and you're like, well, I don't have the tools. How do I do that? So I think having spaces like this, I was very inspired by the space back there. I was like, this is an awesome place for nutrition education. This is an awesome place for conversation to, we're sitting or we're dining, and like just even like the journey of that donut, like how did it arrive here? Like who planted the seed? Who harvested it? Who milled it? How did it get to us for us to enjoy it and eat it here? So having these spaces, not just in schools, but also in community spaces such as this, community gardens, churches, etc. I think it's imperative to tell that story because it's not as black and white as, hey, it's lunchtime. We just went out to the garden and picked some tomatoes and cut it. But what little child picked that tomato and got it here to your door? Yeah.
Storytelling is a really important way to connect with people. I think often people will connect more with stories and personal anecdotes than statistics, facts. They're so much less effective in changing the way that people approach things. And talking about storytelling, Jen, I'm wondering if you can talk about how you think that storytelling through music or otherwise can help raise awareness and inspire action and advocacy around food justice?
Sure, I'm going to do a slight pivot because I actually, along with being a musician and having a long involvement with Why Hunger, which I'll talk about, I'm an educator. I teach actually high school history, global history. So we started my curriculum, I teach at Brooklyn Prospect High School. We start with Industrial Revolution, so 18th century Great Britain, how industrialization and technology, part of that was the industrialization of our food system, the beginnings of climate change, and then that feeding into our second unit, which is imperialism, how industrialized countries needed to seek markets, labor, and raw materials to continue their economic development. And really, when we talk about the food system, if you really bring it back, so much of those seeds were planted with imperialism. And we're still kind of struggling with that, and the globalization of that as well. So yes, it's storytelling that I try to take my kids on a journey, and I've also taught middle school. Take my kids on a journey of just seeing the narrative of, we focus on a few regions, India and China, Democratic Republic of Congo, to try to tell that story. But it's one of the challenges here is that, and as well as something that fortifies us who are involved, is the complexity and the interconnectedness, because you're talking about history, you're talking about technology, you're talking about immigration, you're talking about nutrition, you're talking about climate change, which means all these problems have complex roots, and you can geek out on anything, Earl Butz, head of the USDA, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, coming up with the concept of subsidizing our commodity crops of soybeans and wheat in the 70s. Seemed like a great idea at the time. There's so many of these details to nerd out about, so you have to sort of balance that with taking people on a journey that they can understand. So that's where you get into these individual farm workers or these narratives of liberation that come as communities. And really the strength of the stories is the local, like we were hearing, where you see people making their own connections to local economies, local food systems, farm to school, and all those. That was a rambling answer, but and that's part of the challenge. It's like when you dig into these issues, there's a lot going on, but there's also means that the problems are interconnected just as our solutions fortify each other.
I think storytelling can also be a path in, when everything feels very divided, especially right now, right? So everything feels very polarized. And speaking of everything feeling polarized, Lori, can you talk about the role that immigration policy plays in shaping our food system? I think it's so incredibly relevant right now.
Not to ramble about that too much. My mind is going in all different directions with immigration policy, but as I was saying earlier, the United States has this fundamental contradiction at work. We are a nation that fetishizes and embraces Latin American foodways, and we have this very fraught relationship with people of Latin American origin or descent, to the point where extreme xenophobia comes up at moments of economic downturn and other moments of social crisis or tension. Xenophobia and the fear of outsiders and hostility towards people who are racialized as foreign tends to just spike when we have these moments in which citizens have a scarcity mindset about resources and jobs and other features of American life. And so when it comes to immigration policy, it is very noticeable how the United States pushes people out and then pulls them right back in a few years later. So we have had cycles in which we have made entire populations of people racialized for different reasons, whether they are Asian or Latin American, Latino or Arab, right? The target is consistently moving and shifting, making people feel unwanted. And yet, as soon as we see an incentive to bring them back, we do it shamelessly, and we do it with even fewer and fewer protections. So my book starts in World War II because of Japanese internment and because of the military draft. We saw a reason to bring back Mexican and start importing Puerto Rican labor too, to start serving as guest workers in our agricultural industry and also our railroad industry, to create the infrastructure to transport commodities and food. And just a few years before, we had deported a large number of Mexican and Mexican American people into the interior of Mexico during the Great Depression. 60% of those deportees were citizens who never should have been deported in the first place, but had to find their way back into the United States as guest workers. So the United States has done that time and time again with various guest worker programs that target Latin America and the Caribbean, and we as a nation have gotten very, very used to this dynamic of believing there's a bottomless reservoir of people from the global south who are willing and desperate enough to come and to serve in this, like I said, this underclass that's associated with our food labor force. And immigration policy today is still very scattered. It's inconsistent. The labels that were originally given to people seeking asylum and refuge and protection and sanctuary, they have been stripped and moved and shifted, and the goalposts moved constantly again and again, and the labels taken away from people, temporary protected status taken away from people. So our immigration policy, it's designed to be chaotic. Our detention system is created in such a way that communication gets scattered. You cannot find your loved ones. You cannot trace where people go. And a lot of food workers are caught up in not only being apprehensive about being apprehended and sent into a deportation and detention system, but the people who are then racialized and portrayed as criminals for crossing borders when the U.S. precisely demands that they do so at its convenience. It's just a very unstable way to treat workers who are doing the essential work of nourishing us on a daily basis and are undergoing so many forms of malnourishment, social, economic, and real nutritional, in a real nutritional sense. So it's not a bug of the immigration system, it's a feature that it's chaotic. It's designed to be so that people get discouraged, people don't feel that they can fight for a protected status in this nation, and so the vulnerability and precarity becomes the way of life for a food worker rather than something that should be the exception.
And when you say that the goalposts are always moving, it feels very acute right now, and immigration policy feels like it's moving in a really extreme direction. What can consumers do when they're out in the world to support justice for food laborers?
So I have some concrete suggestions because I feel like people like to go away with some concrete directives, but also a perspective that I think is very important. So one of the things that I firmly believe is that we haven't been aware of it, but once we become aware of it, we can't really unsee it, is this binary that we have created between food as a pleasurable experience for the consumer, right? The food is pleasure, it's done apolitically, right? Like a lot of people ask, food should be a social thing. It should be a fun thing. A meal should be an enjoyable thing. Why do we need to politicize, the very basic act of eating? So we have this, model or stereotype of the apolitical, pleasured consumer, and then the very political but pleasureless food worker. And I think this binary has sort of divorced the ways that we feel we can allow food workers to have food as a pleasure in their lives and take some of that political burden and responsibility from them, because they deserve that time too. They deserve that sphere of life to be pleasurable too. So some concrete organizations I can recommend following at the moment. Here in New York, the Street Vendor Project is a great organization that's trying to protect the over-criminalization, the over-ticketing, the over-policing of street food vendors in this city. The New York City has actually promised to dispense more permits to street food vendors, and they haven't done it at the speed that they promised. So the SVP is leading campaigns along with workers to try to get those permits released more quickly. So you can follow them and follow their efforts and support them. One Fair Wage is another organization that I follow, and that's advocating for restaurant workers to have a livable wage in 25 states by the US's 250th anniversary, which is in 2026. So that's another organization that you can follow. And the Deliverista movement here in the city is also something to keep track of. Delivery workers' rights and being able to have tip transparency on these big apps that all of us use for convenience and delivery. Those are getting hidden from us, getting hidden from workers, and all the service fees we see rising and rising are actually impacting the consumer to bear the burden of what the employer should be doing. So the more that we can see how this binary between pleasured and pleasureless kind of operates and is normalized in society, in that food work has to be this morale stripping kind of occupation, is something to pay attention to. And then these little actions like following these organizations, signing petitions, showing up at a rally at City Hall, something that we can do on a fairly regular basis when we have the time and ability to do it, I think makes a huge difference in showing our city, but also the larger nation, that we are a community of people who care and who are paying attention.
Zoditu, how can food businesses contribute to economic justice in your mind, in especially in historically marginalized neighborhoods?
I would like to answer that to speak directly to the consumer, actually. Because I think that as a business owner, when you're already going into any sort of neighborhood, whether you have a brick and mortar or an online presence, right? Perhaps the goal is to enhance your community through your service, through your product. And you need consumership, right? And I think that we're in a very interesting time. Again, starting our business in 2020, we had a lot of community support. It was on the heels of the world wanting to particularly participate in buying Black, supporting Black-owned businesses off the heels of George Floyd being murdered, COVID happening, so people wanting to support small businesses during the pandemic. And now we're in a new space where within the corporate structure, the rollback of DEI programs and things like that. So as a business owner within the Black and Brown community, we're constantly having to navigate and become creative and flexible and figure things out, whether you're a person of color or you are a woman, you know, or you're a person of marginalization, however it works, right? Because anyone in here, regardless of your creed, has been told no before or has experienced some level of pushback, and you've had to figure it out, right? But the unique thing about owning a business is that it's not just about you. I can make the best, you know, donuts in the world, the best cinnamon rolls in the world. I stand on that. But I also know that it's not just about what I say, it's about what you say as a consumer, how you choose to spend your money. And so I like to turn the question back on the consumer to be mindful of when you're walking into, you know, your favorite grocery store, your favorite library, you know, wherever you consume the most, or, you know, sometimes we're in spaces of we love this place, but we don't get there enough. I'm told all the time, like, I love your donuts, but they're too good, so I can't come too often, right? But that's not gonna help me pay my rent. And so just being very mindful to the consumer to understand that your patronage is integral to a business. And what I like to educate the consumer on is, unfortunately, it's not enough to come in and buy a $4 donut to keep me in business. However, if you work somewhere, your business, the place, the establishment in which you work perhaps orders desserts on a weekly, monthly basis, right? You know, for you, Ken and John, for you to say, you know, one step is to say, I'd love to invite you to speak on this panel, but the next step was to say, you know what, actually, I'm gonna purchase donuts for the congregation and for the programming today. And so what you did was, that's called lateral growth. Not only did you invite me to come and speak about my business to new potential customers, but you also supported my business in a way in which you didn't just buy one donut, you bought 100. And that is a way for people to understand that is true support. That is how now with that, I'm able to employ a young Black man whose family is from Jamaica, that his salary goes back to his family's farm in Jamaica. His mom and his sister live there, and he sends money back to them. And that's really how to, you know, keep this ecosystem of small business alive, and it goes beyond just the proprietor, as you said, but also the people that work there. And so I think that it's really important to educate consumers on how you're spending your money and then how to take it a step further.
There's so many stakeholders, and you're thinking about all of them. Yeah. Natalie, when Jen was talking about Earl Butts and the USDA, made me think of the Farm Bill, made me think of SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. How do policies like SNAP, in your mind, support or hinder access to nutritious food?
So, as you said, SNAP is now formerly known as food stamps. They're a huge help, but there are pros and cons, as you said, right? Because just from a food security perspective, like you're hungry in your belly and you have that money that you have access to, you can go and buy food. You have to prepare the food. You can go and buy food. So from a perspective of it gives you access to food. But there are a lot of drawbacks. We can start with many things. One is a lot of people, the stigma that's attached to SNAP even today, less so since the pandemic, definitely, but there's a huge stigma attached. There's an assumption in society that if you need help, then you are not, like, you know, a contributing member. So you have this stigma there. You also have the reality of how much money you get when you do qualify, how much money you get and how much you can actually afford, because you have this, you know, it's like literally you can eat for 2 weeks and then you have to be hungry for 2 more weeks, because the reality of what you can buy with that SNAP dollar, you know, inflation continues, and even without it, it's just not enough. So yes, it provides a need, it provides a gap, but there are drawbacks. Also, if you qualify for SNAP, the administrative burden, as Dr. Furze just explained about the intentionality of having a system that is many hurdles to climb over to just prevent you from applying for it, it's also the case with SNAP. So just like the administrative toll of getting over it, the know-how, where to go, what to do, that's a huge drawback. And today you may not be working, and then tomorrow you start working a minimum wage job, and then all of a sudden you're working a minimum wage job, and somehow you have enough to make SNAP, so you no longer qualify. So you have, yes, it's necessary, and yes, it's good, but there's so many drawbacks that need to sit down, because if I make $10 today, and then, tomorrow I make $30, it doesn't mean that I'm food secure. So just understanding, those hurdles of using SNAP. But having said that, it's a necessity, and you're entitled to it. So that's another part of the nutrition education. All those spaces I mentioned before, that is another thing that's very, very, having those spaces to have the food and nutrition education conversation and educating you of if you're hungry, you don't have to be, you're entitled to apply for this. You can, that's another connecting the two.
I think it's life-saving for so many people, but there's so many barriers. I mean, even something like internet access. Do you have internet access? Do you have access to a device, right? And if you don't, do you have the money for subway or bus fare to go to the brick and mortar location where somebody can maybe help you if you wait for a long time?
Thanks for that reminder, because another huge drawback to SNAP is that you have to buy, is it still on? Yeah. You have to, you're not allowed to buy prepared food.
Yeah, no hot food.
No hot food. Mm-hmm. Looking around New York City, you see so many people who don't have a home, who don't have access to a kitchen, who don't have access to a place to cook that food. So they may be qualified to apply for SNAP, but based on the requirement being that you can't buy prepared foods, what are they going to do with dried rice and other dried foods?
Yeah. And the message is you're not entitled to this. Yeah. Jen, your father, Harry Chapin, was a pioneer in the fight against hunger and did really important work. How has his legacy shaped your own understanding of food justice?
So many ways. I think one of my dad's mentors, who's still very active, a woman named Frances Moore LePay, who in some ways came into renown with her book that's maybe 60 years old, no, 50-something, Diet for a Small Planet. But what one of Frankie's quotes that really resonates and I repeat often is, hunger is not a scarcity of food, it's a scarcity of justice. And one of the things that she learned in her research, and it was really fundamental to World Hunger Year, now known as Why Hunger, when we founded 50 years ago, was that this world can, whatever's going on with climate change, whatever crises are going on, this world can feed itself many times over. We still have an abundance of food, and it's a matter of, actually, I think the quote was actually a scarcity of democracy. So it's really about food sovereignty, communities being able to make decisions about what food is available in their community, what farmers being able to grow, that they can make those decisions. And this goes back to that imperialism nugget, that the basis of imperialism, you have self-sufficient communities. We have this traditional model of hunger fighting. Go to these communities and teach the poor Nigerians how to farm. It's like, no, humans know how to farm. When you had imperial regimes come in and say, no, you are no longer growing cassava or whatever, you are now growing cotton for export. You are growing indigo. You're no longer in southern India growing something drought-resistant, highly nutritious grain like millet. no, you're going to do something that is much less nutritious, much less adapted to the environment, like rice. So these are the systems that were planted, 200, 300 years ago that we're still working through. So I've just been infused. I joke that learning about hunger were like bedtime stories in my home. But also there was a real sense, my dad, he died in 1981, but he was a real patriot. Like, he was really fortified by these ideas, we're talking about them a lot today, of the founding fathers, with all their imperfections and bigotries. This idea that America is based on the idea that you are an informed citizen, that you are active, that you have a certain responsibility that come with your fundamental rights. And so this sense of possibility, the sense of connection, and yeah, so much that I've learned that energizes me. We were talking about the ways that the industrial food system externalize cost. Yeah, you could get a minimum wage job and no longer qualify from SNAP. More likely, you still qualify for SNAP. And so we all pay for the wage injustice system that... what is the real core solution against hunger in this country is wages. It's that most people who come to this Wednesday food pantry, I'm sure, are from families with workers. So I'm still not answering your question.
Really wonderful. I think what you're talking about, too, the high price of low cost, right? Like, everybody's looking for something to be cheap. But there's such a high cost that comes with cheap food, right? Environmental,
socially,
the labor, everything.
The costs are externalized by our system. Meanwhile, we have small businesses which are externalizing benefits, which are, buying from local farms, helping local workers, creating and fortifying connections. And why hunger? One of our partners for a long time is Rural Migrant Ministry. We basically amplify the work being done, the message that is coming from the grassroots. And one of the things we've learned over 50 years is there used to be this very paternalistic model that still exists in some of the anti-hunger movement, of we'll teach you how to farm, or we'll just give you, for 25 cents a day, you can help little Lourdes, survive. Whereas now it's like what we've always done and now have really built into a movement is no, you go to the community, you see what they're doing, you see what they need, you see the leadership that is coming from migrant workers, that is coming from community gardeners, that is coming from people who are on the front lines, people who are food insecure. And there's just an amazing vibrancy of solutions. And so we just connect those solutions and add resources to them. And learn from each other.
Jen, talking about imperialism and the destruction of culture, traditional culture, food culture especially, Zoditu, what does it mean to you to carry forward culture through your food?
I'm glad I got to go next, because I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I look forward to researching more about that, because I remember, and this will segue into your question, I remember I too was a middle school teacher, so we're all just here standing on middle school. Before I came into the, they're great, and I had to, I remember who I was at that time, which wasn't awesome, but I had a long history within the nonprofit sector, and I worked within, inner city communities which I was not from. And I found myself as a young, AmeriCorps alumni wanting to give back, right? But not being a part of the community, going into the community, trying to assert myself and my ideas and my beliefs, and realizing that these young people whose lives I was hoping to impact still had to go back into their community and still were plagued with all of these things that I could not change. And I always said that I felt the most impactful thing to do was to find out who were those leaders in those neighborhoods and to provide them with the resources and oftentimes just get out the way. You know, so I really love that that's a part of the work that you all do, because I think that we have this heroism complex in certain ways, or this space of like, you know, I'm gonna come in here and save the day, and it's like, this already exists. Like you said, like farming has, particularly when it comes to veganism, it's been a part of the communities of all people, whether you're Latino, Caribbean, African, like plant-based has existed for years. It's just more popularized within other communities that make people feel like it's new.
It's the foundation of most diets.
Exactly.
Meat is a condiment.
Exactly, right, exactly. So speaking to, you know, how it impacts community and culture for me and the work that we do is first understanding being true to the essence of who we are as founders, who, you know, the reason why, you know, a lot of people love the cloudy donut is because it's not oversaturated with glaze. We make donuts big and small, right? So you guys got a taste of the minis, but we also have the regular size donuts too, because people love those. But it speaks to the ethos of where we come from. We small batch everything. Derek, his family comes from North Carolina, where he learned how to make biscuits from scratch by hand. You know, so we use little to no machines when it comes to the processing of our donuts. Of course, we use, you know, a proofer and a sheeter, but all of those donuts that you all had today, those were hand cut. And so we don't do anything that's not particular, that doesn't represent who we are, you know? So for example, we could never open in Brooklyn Heights and try to code switch or pretend to be people that we're not. So that's why we led with, we are Black owned, because it's truly who we are. However, I don't have to tell you that I'm a Black woman, because you clearly see that, right? But it's also important for me to walk with the pride for which I come from, you know? And so I love to say that you know, when you are in a brick and mortar space, a lot of times people are like, oh, it's mom and pop. But I love to say we are our mom and pop's wildest dreams, because we've been able to manifest some of those principles for which I hope, you know, and believe that they stood on and propel them forward. So community, bringing community in everything we do is also understanding that it's first rooted in where we come from, and it serves as a guide map to where we're going. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of bringing community into everything that we do, Natalie, can you, in all of your work as a nutrition educator, share an example of a successful community nutrition initiative that you feel like has made a real impact?
Sure. I will talk about a study that I'm working on now. So this organization, Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture, they cater to, you know, the rich. And they've, for a long time, wanted to make some meaningful partnership with communities that they're physically connected to, but just don't have.
It's Stone Barns Blue, like of the Blue Hill
of
restaurant.
The Blue Hill restaurant.
Which is like a Michelin-starred restaurant. Yeah,
very expensive,
okay.
very expensive to attend, to dine at. So they were really trying, but they found that they'll have like a trip to the farm, and that was it, goodbye. They weren't really making any sort of meaningful impact, any sort of community-driven. And they were the ones who were taking those initiatives. And then during COVID, then everybody realized, oh my goodness, these communities really need food, and they started to give food, but still, they were like one-off events, and they couldn't figure out, like, how do we really get into the community? And then they did what we have just been talking about. They started to do what we researchers like to call community participatory research. And that's where you said, okay, I know I may have the resources, and I think this is what you need, but I'm not sitting where you are, so help me figure this out. And it was a brilliant idea. So they have, they started in the South Bronx, perhaps one of the poorest zip codes in the United States. And they went to people who were advocates on the ground, who already was very familiar with the communities. I keep looking at you. I'm sorry. You guys are also there. Voila. And so, but they also wanted to make it just be beyond just giving food. So they farm the food. If you're familiar with stone barns, they're really passionate about regenerative farming. So trying to leave the earth in a better place than they started, which is like, indigenous communities, that's very common. Complete contrast to conventional farming. And so the major part of the program is to distribute food that they plant there. But they also recognize that, we have to, it's right now we have funding for 3 years, so what are we going to do when we're gone, when we run out of funding? So they're doing these baskets where they're providing all of the material so that participants could grow their own food. So they provide seedlings, and if your seedlings fail, we'll replace them. And a huge part of that exchange, that partnership, is also education, food and nutrition education. So we already see it. I'm in the middle of analyzing the data for the first 2 years, and we've had over 100% increase in people who applied for SNAP and WIC because they just were afraid. They thought they would not qualify, or for some reason they couldn't do it. So we've already so this is a program that we're trying to create. This is a pilot. We're trying to create a model for other farms to participate in. And it's a longitudinal, so we'll do it for 3 years, and we're hoping to get funding to do more. But I just want to talk a little bit about those groups that are a part of the community-based organizations. We have one where, and by the way, we intentionally rotate distribution. So the food is distributed between April and November every other week, and we intentionally rotate it. There are 2 farmers markets. There's a place that gives free after-school music classes. There's a place that gives free books, and there's La Morado, which is a community kitchen, community restaurant. So you find that there's zero food waste, because La Morado, if you're familiar with it, they literally would get food from farms that are, okay, we've gone to the farmer's market today, we're not going to take this back, it's going to spoil, and so they'll donate that food to La Morado. It's the same for any produce that was not picked up will be taken there, and it's a community kitchen format, so you show up and you pay for it. So if I go there and I could afford to pay for my meal, I could pay for 1 meal or 2 meals. If you show up and you don't have money, you will get a free meal. You're not going to leave hungry. So it's zero waste in terms of, because anybody who's familiar with fresh farm food, from a farmer's market's perspective, from a community-supported agriculture perspective, you can have some food waste there if you don't have a system of making sure you capture that food waste. So I really love this model because starting from stone barns and just their own model of leaving the earth in a better place than it is today, to the food that they cook at Blue Hill is the food that participants would receive. So it's not like a lower level of food, the quality of food. Participants would also come to the farm. They bring all the families, a big family day. They see where their food is prepared. They get to participate in, ecological activities. And guess what? A lot of these participants are working in the food industry. So they're the ones who, they're the ones who slave away to produce our foods, to harvest our foods, and they can't afford it themselves. So no surprise when we kind of gave them all these growing kits, and they're excelling, and it's whoa, why are they excelling? So I'm okay, well, first of all, they're the ones who are growing our food, so we shouldn't be surprised. And a lot of them come from Central and South America, so it's just a culture of growing your own food. So I am passionate. I love this program. I'm in the middle of the data analysis now. We're getting ready to publish in a journal, but it's a model that I think if we can figure out funding long term, that it can help. It can help communities such as these. What's the program called? It's called LEAF, shortcut for Leading an Ecological and Accessible Food System.
Why Hunger might have funding for that.
We will talk.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I read at some point that Stone Barns was owned by a Rockefeller or a Vanderbilt, right?
Rockefeller, it's in,
It was owned by a Rockefeller, right?
Yeah, the exact history, I know they have a huge anonymous funder who left them a lot of money, and this is another reason where they're okay, we need to figure out how to get this money, but not in a way that you go and, you don't have those relationships, but you have a longer, you intentionally consult with the community you're hoping to serve so that you can build trust and a long-term relationship, so those funds could be channeled from their sources, Rockefeller to.
Yes. I mean, that's what makes that program even more beautiful to me, right? Is that like a family like the Rockefellers, like, I don't know where all that money came from, but
But I will tell you, though, that the LEAF program specifically, it's not necessarily funded by that funding source, because it's interesting.
I just think it's interesting that
Stone Barns itself. Yes. Yeah.
Exists
Because of
that, and it makes it even more beautiful to me that it's serving people in the South Bronx.
Oh, and we extended to Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow is in Westchester, but it's a poor community that serves the richer community. So we've been expanding. So exciting stuff.
So I have some questions for the whole panel, and I guess one of the first ones I want to ask is, what do we lose when certain foods and food traditions or food businesses are erased due to gentrification or globalization? What are we losing? I mean, I thought of you, Jen, if I'm being honest, and your discussion about imperialism. Not to totally throw it on you.
When we lose, could you repeat, what are we losing?
What do we lose with gentrification? Like when we lose certain foods or food traditions, what are we losing?
Well, we've kind of already lost it because, I mean, our American food system is, as we've all been speaking, it lacks basic awareness of what food is, that food is a human right. That's what we say at Why Hunger, nutritious food is a human right. Food is not a commodity to be treated as casino chips as it is in financial markets. So we have to just reclaim the joy, the connection, the environmental integrity, the cultural richness of, what is kind of primal human connection to food. I mean, it's all right there on the surface, and, Dr. Flores was speaking of like the contradiction, like our food system is entirely like it's entirely nourished by our schizophrenic identity as a nation of immigrants. I mean, not to dash on, British culinary traditions, but that's not that's not what what gives people joy in their traditionally. But there's just so much. There's so much. Everybody knows there's so much that we can do when we get when we grow our own food, whether it's tomatoes in your Brooklyn window box, when you know your farmer, when you buy intentionally, thoughtfully crafted food from your local business, when you connect with your kids. People are like, I don't have time to make dinner. I've got toddlers. It's like, you know what? You can put the iPad aside and work with your toddlers on making food. There's just so many opportunities that we have to have a holistic relationship with food and food justice.
Well, and Jen, you had made the very good point about monocultures. So the very fact that we as a nation created monocultures in the period or the era of slavery and kept that model, and in speaking of imperialistic action, created monocultures in places that were incredibly focused on biodiversity. We've ruined it at home and we've ruined it abroad. And when you set up monocultures, you set up things like company towns, you set up like monopolies held by certain corporations and industries. And when you do that, you take away another form of diversity, which is diversity of enterprise models and diversity of ways of treating workers. Like, so the poultry industry in the Carolinas has come to dominate ways in which workers are paid. Like, all the employers collude on the wages that they're going to pay these workers because there's no oversight. We lack enough OSHA inspectors. We lack enough Department of Labor inspectors to actually go and look at conditions on the ground. So like Tyson and Butterball and, you know, all of these big companies. Yeah, exactly. It creates the conditions of contagion that would impact us as consumers. So a really important thing is to realize any injustice done to workers at the beginning of the process, you will feel in some way at the end of the process. So if there's an incredible amount of pesticides sprayed in the faces and on the bodies of farm workers, you will have that residue on your food. If they're not allowed to have sick days to stay home from work, you are more prone to bacterial infection. And this goes for farm workers, it goes for restaurant workers, grocery store workers, all these different types of workers. And injustice in the serving industry with sexual harassment. And tips then influenced by having to endure a lot of uncomfortable social dynamics instead of just performing good service that at both sides is an enjoyable relationship. We feel those social effects too. Truck drivers who bring your food to places of distribution, delivery workers who bring your dinner to your door, the lack of safety regulations, the lack of oversight of the speed at which they have to move, at the amount of product they have to move in a certain amount of time, endangers you on the road, endangers you too. So I think a lot of people have to keep in mind that whether it's like heat stroke in the fields or contagion in the fields or pressure to perform and produce a certain quota in a specific amount of time, consumers might not feel those exact forms of injustice, but they will feel a different type of harm at the end of the line. And I don't think people really make the connection between all the steps involved in the food and all the different harms that could come to consumers at the end of the line.
And it's not necessary. It doesn't need to be that way.
What is, and I'm going to also open this up to the panel, maybe we can go one by one. I'm wondering what's one thing that you would love people who are part of this conversation to leave today thinking about as they move through the world as consumers?
I guess I already answered.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just going to piggyback on I think what everyone has said so far. It's the power of your dollar. You control where you spend that dollar. And it may be inconvenient. Yes, I know sometimes I'm like, I could just go on Amazon and order this and I'll get it tomorrow. Or I could try to get 5,000 steps in and walk to this very inconvenient place. So we have to shift the narrative that we tell ourselves. Because things that we think of convenience and we don't think of all of the people who are impacted because of that convenience. And so experience some inconvenience yourself, like, and in the process build community. So I think really recognizing the power of your dollar. And also policy. Like, I know that's a dirty word these days, but ultimately we need to enact laws. And a lot of us, when we think of laws, you think, oh my God, it has to be at the federal level. But uber local laws is where it's at. And getting involved in the process, no matter how passively, it's necessary to make the change. So between getting involved in the political process to impact policy, whether it be signing a petition, showing up to protest, or showing up at City Hall to testify, or just not spending your dollar on an already multi-billion-dollar platform.
We all have our issues with our Mayor Adams, but if you dig in, what he has done on the food system in New York City is some interesting stuff. I mean, just bringing plant-based meals to the New York City hospital system geek out on this because it's pretty interesting, some of the policies, because in his experience with diabetes, he became kind of an evangelist for plant-based eating. And there's some really great activists. There's a woman, Kiana Mackey, who is always fundamental to Just Food and farmers markets in New York City, who's now in the administration. So there's some interesting contradictions. We have to, and we're going to deal with this also with the very strange Health and Human Services secretary we have now, who some of his ideas are exactly what we've all been moving for, and the exact ideas that Michelle Obama was mobilizing for, and the corporate food system brought every resource to squashing, now have a chance for new life as far as the food system and obesity epidemic, the food system and corporate consolidation. There are these mumbles that might come out of the federal government. But again, yeah, the local is what it's all about. But there's some interesting things that are going to happen. I would suggest you follow Marion Nessel. Foodpolitics.org is a blog from the great nutrition educator based in NYU. The whyhunger.org website is an excellent resource for all the solutions that are happening all around the world.
I would say I definitely echo the statements that everyone has made thus far, and I've learned a lot. So I'm really pleased to have sat on this panel to take away a lot of things myself. And aside for the obvious plug of come to Cloudy Donut, I would say that I agree, recognizing how you spend your money and really, pushing the dollar forward. I know Friday was like a national blackout day of not spending, right? And I completely understand the reasons behind it, but I was so hopeful for people to kind of redirect how they spend their money to perhaps shop locally in that sense,
that
right?
messaging was in there, but maybe
Yeah.
once they said buy local,
Right.
corporate.
But it's hard with messaging like that, right? Because it's like, how does one participate in being a part of a political conversation, but also be mindful of the practices that they can have for themselves if it's not being shifted fully in that way? And so I think that it's important to just think within your community, within your household, what can I do to make, I used to practice Buddhism, and one of the things that they said in Nichiren Buddhism is, every step that you take should be a step towards humanity. And I think as we move, within this world and as it evolves and changes is, what I hope the takeaway is how can the next step that you take not just be great for your family, but for the next, those that we may not see, and whether it's, supporting a local business or, participating in your community garden, how can we take an action with just a simple step? And I know it sounds very grandiose, but I really do believe that it can really help the next generation that we don't even know yet, in a really beautiful way. So that's what I hope to take away, because personally I learned a lot, and so hopefully you guys did too, and we can do something really great.
Yeah, I think thinking about who and what is impacted by the dollar you're spending. When you feel like you're getting a good deal, it's a good deal for you. But who's it not a good deal for? Who in that process is it not a good deal for? Yeah. Should we see if there's any questions? Ken and John, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, my pants.
I love the message about convenience. Convenience is killing us,
Yes,
And when you
absolutely.
bypass it and take the longer route, it is win, win, win in so many ways.
Yeah.
We wanted to be sure that our guests were able to share as much as they brought to share. They probably have much more to share, so we kind of fill the time with this conversation, and the conversation's coming to a close. Is there anyone with a burning question? Okay. I know that I shared with these folks that we would not have a Q&A, but that if they could stick around and chat, they might be willing and able to do that. I do have a question for Zodi too. I don't know if you've said how it is you decided that vegan donuts were what you and your partner would do. I'd like to ask you if you wouldn't mind.
So it's important to, like, I'm not the baker, but I have a really really impactful role within the brand is I have to eat everything. So that was a joke. But I really do. Like, so I don't make the product, but I eat everything. And so Derek, who founded Cloudy Donut, started within a restaurant, and he is the type of person, I don't know how you guys are after you eat your dinner, but he is the type of person, like, immediately after he eats something, he's like, I want a sweet, like, I need something. And so he was, in the kitchen coming up with, again, coming from like a Southern background of making biscuits and things like that, he was on the prowl for desserts because he had come from the brick and mortar space of a restaurant. And one of the main reasons why we started Cloudy Donut to have this grab and go concept is when you go to a restaurant, let's say specifically breakfast, you can get a plate of eggs and then you say, oh, I want my eggs scrambled, I want my eggs fried hard. Everyone is an expert. And so it was very, it's a lot in the industry of like service and, different things. And we wanted to kind of simplify our lives, right? And so if you go to a bakery, chances are, let's say you get a pastry and you don't love it, you don't typically go back and say, I wanted this way, or I didn't like that. You typically just take it home and you're like, man, I should have got that brownie instead. So when he came up with this donut, he wasn't really in a space of mindfulness initially of like, I want this to be a vegan product. He was really just looking for a dynamic way to create a donut absent of dairy because he himself wanted to kind of change the trajectory of his own lifestyle. A lot of people, as you stated with Mayor Eric Adams, who is a customer of Cloudy Donut, experienced his own issues with diabetes. We understand within the community there's so many levels of how food can impact our health. And so he started with the powdered sugar donut, which is actually how we came up with our name Cloudy Donut. It was like biting into a cloud. And he expanded to over 70 plus flavors. Now we make cinnamon rolls, pound cakes, and cookies, etc. And so one of the most beautiful things about as we grew the brand with this vegan product, and a lot of people often ask, well, how do you make a vegan donut, right? So that means that there is an absence of dairy, so no eggs, no milk. So one of the binding agents that we use instead of eggs is applesauce, right? One of the most beautiful things that I really, really love to see is that we are able to provide a dessert to a child. Nowadays, we see a huge uptick in children growing up with nut allergies, dairy allergies, more than ever. And I kind of wonder when I was younger, did we have these allergies too and our parents kind of were just like, it's whatever. Or, obviously the food has become drastically processed, over time. And so that's how these children are having these different allergies and aversions. But seeing a child eat a donut for the first time and being able to participate in the simple pastime of a birthday party was one of the reasons that we decided to expand beyond the donut. So now there's pound cakes, as I said, there's cinnamon rolls. And it was really important for us, for all people to be able to participate. But it's important to note that 70% of my customer base are not vegan. So now for some people it's just an afterthought, for other people it's an eye-opener, and it's a gateway to explore other items within the vegan and plant-based community. So it really started as just an experiment in the kitchen because he was like, I'm feeling lethargic when I have dairy. And then it really turned into a business model that has been beneficial to people just, regardless of your dietary preferences.
Thank you. I should have asked where the name Cloudy came from, but you answered that.
Powdered sugar.
Yeah, I love that. So I think we'll draw this to a close. I just want to say I experienced my mind expanding, my heart filling with gratitude, and my soul being fed by this conversation. I feel inspired to go out and stand with people who are invisible and neglected, to buy local, to keep eating vegan, and to follow you all on your journeys, to keep following you, I should say, in some cases. I could not be more grateful. I'm so grateful for all of you here, for all of you who joined us. This will be recorded, and if you know people who, or has been, if you know people who want to get in on the conversation, have them check our website, stannholytrinity.org, I should mention. This intersection series will continue, as Reverend Brendan said, in June, on June 1st, with a conversation at the intersection of identity and justice. And in October, on the 5th, with a conversation at the intersection of sanctuary and justice. And we'll bring, as we did here, in as many perspectives as we can to be expansive and invite many to join us in trying to be bigger and better people and change makers. I hope you'll join me in thanking these wonderful people for spending this hour and a half with us. And I hope you'll stick around if you can for a conversation with them. There are more donuts in the parish hall. Sorry for all of you online. Go to Cloudy Donut. And God bless you all. Thank you so much.